Daniel 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylonia, came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. The Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the vessels of the temple of God. He brought them to the land of Shinar, to the temple of his God, and the vessels he brought into the treasure house of his God. The king told Ashpenaz, the chief of his officers, to bring from the children of Israel, from the royal seed, and from the nobles, youths in whom there was no blemish, who were good-looking, skillful in all wisdom, discerning in knowledge, and perceptive in learning, and who have the stamina to stand and serve in the king's palace, and to teach them the script and language of the Chaldeans. The king provided for them a daily portion from the king's food and from his drinking wine to nurture them for 3 years, at the conclusion of which they would stand and serve before the king. Among them were, from the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief officer gave them names. To Daniel he gave the name Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. Daniel set the resolve in his heart not to be defiled by the king's food, nor by his drinking wine. So he requested of the chief officer that he not be defiled. God granted Daniel favor and mercy before the chief officer. And the chief officer said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has provided your food and your drinks, lest he see your faces more ill at ease than the other youths in your situation, and you will forfeit my head to the king. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief officer had assigned to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Please, test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us of the pulse, and we will eat it. And give us water, and we will drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be seen by you, and act toward your servants in accordance with what you see. He heeded them in this matter, and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were of healthier flesh than all the youths eating the king's food. Thereafter, the steward would take away their food and their drinking wine and give them pulse. As for these youths, the 4 of them, God gave them learning and skill in every script and wisdom, and Daniel understood every kind of vision and dreams. At the end of the years after which the king had said to bring them, the chief officer brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king spoke with him, and there was not found among them all anyone like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they stood and served before the king. In every matter of the art of reasoning that the king asked of them, he found them 10 times better than all the necromancers and the astrologers that were in his entire kingdom. Daniel was there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. Daniel 2. In the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar dreamt dreams. His spirit was agitated and his sleep was interrupted. The king said to call the necromancers, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldean stargazers to tell the king his dreams. They came and stood before the king. The king said to them, I have dreamt a dream, and my spirit is agitated to know the dream. The Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will relate the interpretation. The king responded and said to the Chaldeans, The thing has escaped me. If you do not make the dream and its interpretation known to me, you will be cut to bits, and your homes will be made a dunghill. But if you do tell the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Just tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will relate the interpretation. The king responded and said, I know for a certainty that you are buying time, because you have seen that the matter is firmly established by me, that if you do not make the dream known to me, your sentence is unequivocal. Thus, you have arranged lying and corrupt words to speak before me, until the time changes. Just tell me the dream, and then I will know that you can relate its interpretation to me. The Chaldeans responded before the king and said, There is no man on earth who can relate the king's matter. That is why no king, leader, or ruler has ever requested such a thing of any necromancer or astrologer or Chaldean. The king's request is difficult, and there is no other who can relate it before the king, except the angels, whose dwelling is not with human beings. As a result of this, the king grew upset and very angry, and he commanded to destroy all the sages of Babylonia. As the decree was being implemented and the wise men slain, Daniel and his companions were sought to be slain. Then Daniel gave counsel and advice to Arioch, the king's chief executioner, who had gone to slay the sages of Babylonia. He exclaimed and said to Arioch, the king's official, "Why is the king's decree so peremptory?" Then Arioch told Daniel the story. Daniel went and requested of the king that he give him time to relate the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to his companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and to pray for mercy from before the God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions should not be destroyed with the rest of the sages of Babylonia. Then, in a nocturnal vision, the secret was revealed to Daniel. Daniel then blessed the God of heaven. Daniel exclaimed and said, "May the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. He alters times and seasons. He deposes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who know how to reason. He reveals the deep and the mysterious. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells within him. To you, O God of my forefathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might. And now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the matter of the king." Consequently, Daniel came to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the sages of Babylonia. He went and said thus to him, "Do not annihilate the wise men of Babylonia. Bring me before the king, and I will tell the interpretation to the king." Then Arioch brought Daniel before the king in haste, and thus said to him, "I have found a man from the people of the exile of Judah who will make known the interpretation to the king." The king responded and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, "Are you capable of making known to me the dream that I saw and its interpretation?" Daniel answered before the king and said, "The secret the king requests, no wise men, astrologers, necromancers, or demonists are able to tell the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has informed King Nebuchadnezzar what will be at the end of days. Your dream and the visions in your head on your bed are these. You, O king, your thoughts came while you were on your bed about what would happen in the future, and the revealer of secrets informed you what will be. As for me, it is not because I possess more wisdom than any other being that the secret was revealed to me, but rather to make the interpretation known to the king, so that you may know what has occupied your thoughts. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a huge statue. This statue, which was immense, and whose brightness was extraordinary, stood opposite you, and its appearance was fearsome. This statue, its head of fine gold, its breast and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of copper, its legs of iron, and its feet, partly of iron and partly of earthenware. As you watched, a stone was hewn without hands and struck the statue on its feet of iron and earthenware, and crumbled them. Then they crumbled together, the iron, the earthenware, the copper, the silver, and the gold. They became like chaff from summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, and no trace was found of them. And the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the earth. This is the dream, and we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, to whom the King of Kings, who is the God of heaven, has given a strong kingdom, power, and honor, and wherever people, beasts of the field, and birds of the sky dwell, he has given them into your hand and made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. And after you will arise another kingdom inferior to you, and then another, a third kingdom of copper, which will rule the whole earth. The fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron, just as iron crumbles and flattens everything. And as iron shatters all these, it will crumble and shatter. The feet and the toes that you saw, partly of potter's earthenware and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom, and will have some of the firmness of iron, just as you saw iron mixed with clay like earthenware. As for the toes, partly of iron and partly of earthenware, part of the kingdom will be powerful, and part of it will be broken. That you saw iron mixed with clay like earthenware. They will mix the offspring of men, but they will not cling to one another, just as iron does not mix with earthenware. Then, in the days of these kingdoms, the God of heaven will establish a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will its sovereignty be left to another people. It will crumble and consume all these kingdoms, and it will stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was hewn from the mountain, not by human hands, and it crumbled the iron, the copper, the earthenware, the silver, and the gold, so has the great God made known to the king what will happen in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is reliable. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and prostrated himself to Daniel. And with offering and incense he wished to exalt him. The king exclaimed to Daniel and said, "In truth, I know that your God is the God over gods, Lord of kings, and the revealer of secrets, since you were able to reveal this secret." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts. He empowered him as ruler over the entire land of Babylonia and chief official over all the sages of Babylonia. Daniel requested of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the land of Babylonia. And Daniel was at the king's gate. Daniel 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold, its height 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He stood it in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylonia. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to assemble the satraps, the nobles, the governors, the judges, the treasurers, the advisors, the guards, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Thereupon the rulers, the nobles, the governors, the judges, the treasurers, the advisors, the guards, and all the provincial officers gathered together for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood facing the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. A herald cried out, "It is commanded to you, O peoples, nations, and languages, when you hear the sound of the horn, the whistle, the tambourine, the drum, the cymbals, the flute, and all kinds of music, you shall fall and prostrate yourselves to the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall and prostrate himself will immediately be thrown into a fiery, burning furnace." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the whistle, the tambourine, the drum, the cymbals, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, the nations, and the languages fell and prostrated themselves to the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Thereupon, at that very time, some Chaldean men came forth and defamed the Jews. They exclaimed and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. You, O king, issued a decree that every person who hears the sound of the horn, the whistle, the tambourine, the drum, and the cymbals, the flute, and all kinds of music is to fall and prostrate himself to the golden statue. And whoever does not fall and prostrate himself is to be thrown into a fiery burning furnace. There are Jewish men whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylonia, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have not accepted your decree upon themselves, O king. Your God they do not worship, and to the golden statue that you have set up they do not prostrate themselves." Then King Nebuchadnezzar, in anger and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men were then brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed and said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not worship my God and that you do not prostrate yourselves to the golden statue that I have set up? Now, behold, you must be prepared when you hear the sound of the horn, the whistle, the tambourine, the drum, the cymbals, the flute, and all kinds of music, to fall and prostrate yourselves to the statue I have made. But if you do not prostrate yourselves, you will immediately be thrown into a fiery, burning furnace. And who is the God who can save you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego responded and said to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we are not worried about replying to you about this matter. Behold, our God, whom we worship, is able to save. He will rescue from the fiery, burning furnace and from your hand, O king. But if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not worship your God, and to the golden statue that you have set up we shall not prostrate ourselves. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the form of his face became contorted at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He exclaimed and commanded his men to heat the furnace to 7 times more than it was normally heated. Then he commanded the strong men of his guard to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to throw them into the fiery burning furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their pants, their robes, and their other clothing, and were thrown into the fiery burning furnace. Thereupon, because of the king's peremptory command and because the furnace was so overheated, those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were killed by a flame of the fire. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the fiery burning furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, bewildered, stood up in haste. He exclaimed to his ministers and said, Did we not throw 3 bound men into the fire? They replied and said to the king, True, O king. He exclaimed and said, Behold, I see 4 unbound men walking in the fire, and there is no wound on them. And the appearance of the 4th one is like an angel's. Then Nebuchadnezzar approached the opening of the fiery burning furnace. He exclaimed and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the supreme God, step out and come here. Thereupon Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. The satraps, the nobles, the governors, and the ministers of the king assembled and saw these men over whose bodies the fire had no effect, the hair of whose head was not singed, whose cloaks were unaltered, and who had not absorbed even the smell of fire. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed and said, Blessed is the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and saved his servants who relied on him and disobeyed the king's order, and offered their bodies in order to not worship or prostrate themselves to any god other than their God. I issue a decree that any people, nation, or language who will speak amiss about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to bits, and his house will be turned into a dunghill. For there is no God able to rescue in this manner. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylonia. From King Nebuchadnezzar to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell throughout the earth, may your peace be abundant. It behooves me to relate the signs and wonders that the supreme God has performed for me. How great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion for all generations. Okay, then, welcome back. That was the beginning of Daniel. So firstly, pulse seems to be essentially vegetables. But why the emphasis on the food? Is this about contaminated food that the Jews are supposed to avoid eating? I suppose after however many days of eating the pulse and then seeing, of course, that these guys looked great, it extends to Daniel and company a certain degree of credibility. Also, it establishes these guys as like actual believers. Even though they're in Babylon, they're still going to do their thing. These 4, they are considered to be exceptionally intelligent and very, very talented. Especially Daniel. This guy comes to the king, and he gives to the king the dream and the interpretation of the dream. And that's when the king remembers, oh yeah, that is what I dreamt. Seems a little wild. Night visions, nocturnal visions, these seem to me to be dreams. And this is how God communicates to Daniel. And it works out perfect. Daniel is sensitive to these signs. So he hears the message and he translates whatever it was that he sees in his dream and shares that with Nebuchadnezzar. Get out of town, man. This guy's absolutely blown away. He's like, Daniel, you're going to be the head of everything. So Nebuchadnezzar builds this golden statue and he says to himself, you know what would make me so happy? Is if everybody would bow down to the statue as if they were bowing down to me. That would be cool. And so this whole thing, they do the whole thing and get all these people and everything. And they have the music and they have to rehearse the music and all the kinds. It's enormous what goes into this guy's need to be adored. But it pales in comparison to how absolute these Hebrews are. They're like, Nebuchadnezzar, we're not going to bow down. And you can kill us all you like. God will save us. Doesn't mean nothing to us. So why were they not afraid to be burned alive? Did they know that God would save them? Is there a precedence for supernatural intervention in situations like these? And who is the fourth person in the fire? What is the fourth person in the fire? We've got a story here, folks. Thank you for listening. The NQE is out.